She paid dues because I am no day at the beach. I know I'm hard to get along with. I know that because I might wake up in the morning and go, hey, wake up. What was that shit you said last February?
Hell. If there's a hell, I've been there. There is a hell. And the devil turned out to be me.
And I think what people don't know is he really was a dad. So he could be completely hands-on and completely hands-off at the same time. You didn't know which dad actually you might get.
Did you know that Richard Pryor, the famous comedian, once confessed that someone was the love of his life?
As soon as he's off stage, he really didn't know how to operate in the world. Drugs allowed him to be something other than himself with a memory of that childhood.
Pryor, known for his bold humor and fearless honesty, shared much about his relationships, but this one was special. Who was this person that captured his heart so deeply? Let's explore his love story of Richard Pryor.
My mother's Puerto Rican, and my father's Negro, and we lived in a real big Jewish tenement building in an Italian neighborhood.
As anybody who's heard his stand-up routines about his childhood knows, the home Pryor grew up in wasn't exactly Norman Rockwell material. Born on December 1st, 1940, in Peoria, Illinois, the comedian was raised in a whorehouse with his mother a prostitute, his father a pimp, and his grandmother the madam, who owned a total of 3 brothels. The family also owned a tavern and a pool hall and did bootlegging too. So much for the good old days being more wholesome.
And it's a complete invention. He can't talk about how he grew up in a set of brothels run by his grandmother. If he were to do that, it would have been death.
I saw my mother turn tricks for some drunk white man when I was a kid, he once said. I saw my father take the money, and I saw what it did to them. One of the women his mother slept with for money was Peoria's mayor. He saw his father severely beat his mother when he was young before she finally left when he was 5. His mother was rough with him as well, yet Pryor said that it could have been worse. At least Gertrude, his mother, didn't flush me down the toilet, he said. This wasn't just a comic riff. Pryor once found a dead baby in a box in the house.
He did a lot of fabrication on a lot of his comedy because his own history was so checkered and so unpleasant. He wasn't proud of it.
If growing up in a whorehouse wasn't enough dysfunction in Pryor's life, he also was emmeted multiple times. First by a teenage boy he referred to as Bubba when he was 6. For a long time, Pryor told People magazine, I tried not to think of it. In the 1980s, Bubba approached him at an autograph session when the comedian returned to Peoria. I went out and signed an autograph for Bubba's son, Pryor explained to People. But when Bubba left, I said to myself, I pray to God his son don't have to go through what I did. His official bio also alleged that a Catholic priest Eddie-Ed him. As the New York Daily News put it, his dad and uncle plotted to blackmail the priest by encouraging young Richard to flirt with the reverend on the phone. But Pryor's grandma put an end to that charade. Not exactly a leave it to Beaver home life. Pryor did discover something else in his childhood, the ability to make others laugh. When he was in the 6th grade, he was late to school a lot, until his teacher made a deal with him. If he showed up on time, he'd get 10 minutes once a week to perform slapstick routines in front of his classmates. It was his first audience, and it made him want to show up to school on time.
As soon as he's off stage, he really didn't know how to operate in the world. Drugs allowed him to be something other than himself with a memory of that childhood.
Although he sometimes dismissed the damage caused by his childhood traumas, his future relationships were often chaotic and short-lived. Pryor married 7 times, twice to the 2 of 5 women. His first marriage to Patricia Price lasted for a year, and then he had 3 serious relationships, including 2 two-year marriages to Shelley Bonus and Deborah McGuire. He had 2 children during that time, Renee, daughter of his girlfriend Susan when Pryor was 17, and a son Richard with Price. He also had untold affairs and relationships with women, including one with actress Pam Grier, his love interest in the 1977 film Greased Lightning. She wrote in her memoir that he did so much cocaine that the drug accumulated in her vagina. Yes, really. Their relationship ended after several conflicts, including some competitive tennis matches where she beat him twice. Pryor once said to People magazine, "I love strong, smart women, but I feel inadequate to them." This insecurity followed him throughout his life.
Because I thought about, at one point, look at the opportunity I've been given to do so much. And whatever I end up doing, I got a bass pipe in my hand and fifth of Cavassier in the other, in a room all alone by myself.
He also had an affair with Margot Kidder, and one with a drag queen he said looked like Josephine Baker. He described the affair in his autobiography, writing, "I discovered that she was actually a he. For some reason, I didn't care. But after 2 weeks of being gay, I went back to life as a heterosexual." And while Pryor had a lot of good qualities, he also was still fighting the demons of his childhood and was prone to fits of rage. That, combined with the drugs and drinking, wasn't exactly a good match. The New Yorker reported that Pryor regularly beat up women. He also had a thing for guns, shooting up both a car and a fish tank.
Hell. If there's a hell, I've been there. There is a hell. And the devil turned out to be me.
Another unforgettable incident happened. Just after getting married to his then-wife, Deborah McGuire, Pryor got into a huge argument with her friends during a New Year's Eve party at their house. The party ended in chaos, with Pryor chasing McGuire's friends out of the house. Then he took things even further by firing several shots into one of their empty cars sitting in the driveway. Most of the guests had already run away on foot. Pryor was later arrested for assault with a deadly weapon, and he told People magazine, "I don't know why I do self-destructive things like that. I want to learn from my mistakes." Despite the love between Pryor and McGuire, the event led to their divorce. McGuire said they still cared for each other, but she explained that Pryor's way of handling anger was part of the problem. He would keep his feelings inside until he couldn't hold them back anymore, and then he would explode. She told People, "A lot of things were said in anger that will be hard to smooth over. Richard just can't argue. He waits until something gets under his skin so bad he blows up."
She paid dues because I am no day at the beach. I know I'm hard to get along with. I know that because I might wake up in the morning and go, "Hey, wake up. What was that shit you said last February?"
After the split, Pryor told People, "For a long time I saw women as sexual objects, and I was always trying to keep from getting hurt. Then one day they would pack up and leave, taking something more with them than their clothes. They took my happiness." He added, "I've finally gotten to the stage where I am trying to understand women as friends. I'd rather rob a bank than mess with women the way I used to."
My wife, "What did you No, I was not her. I don't care what you think you saw. I was not Now you gonna believe me or your lying eyes?"
In terms of his relationship with the women, I think that the closer they came to him, were with him, the more ugliness they often experience, Saul said during an interview. Just as he had lived in fear when he was growing up, he learned from his childhood that love was tangled up in violence, and he never could quite separate those in terms of his relationships with women. Kathy McKee, who was dating entertainer Sammy Davis Jr. at the time she met Richard Pryor, said he kept women at a distance. "You couldn't fill the hole. You couldn't. There's nothing you could do. And he wouldn't let you. He wouldn't even let you try. You're not coming in here, and you're not going to save me, and you're not going to rescue me. Forget that," McKee said. He was not happy with his life, no matter how much money he had earned or what kind of success he had attained.
She paid dues because I am no day at the beach. I know I'm hard to get along with. I know that.
Jennifer Pryor said that she fell madly in love with the comedian the first time the two met. She said that she was attracted to his vulnerability and that she felt like he was her soulmate, love of my life. Yet another wild marriage. Jennifer first met Richard when she was hired to redecorate his house. At the time, she was in her early 20s, trying to make it in Hollywood as an actress. She had already appeared in some small movies, and she said she'd even had flings with famous men like Warren Beatty and Roman Polanski. When Jennifer first met Richard, he was going through a rough time. She later wrote in a magazine that he looked sad and heartbroken over another woman. He was drinking heavily, trying to drown his feelings. She described that first meeting, saying you could feel the tears in the room. From that point on, Jennifer became close to Richard, And in her words, she was his main woman.
This is my about fourth, fifth, sixth marriage, eighth, I don't know. But I remember every woman that I was ever in love with. I remember all 12 of them. I really do. They were wonderful. It's just, I don't know. I've never been able to have what they call sustain a relationship. That's what it's called now.
Jennifer saw a special side of Richard that others didn't always notice. She once said that women in particular connected with Richard because he showed his feelings and struggles, just like many women do. His fans, especially female fans, loved that he wasn't afraid to seem vulnerable and didn't always fit in with everyone else. Jennifer felt he understood the loneliness that women sometimes feel and how they don't always feel like they belong. But even though they had this strong bond, things were far from perfect between them. Richard had a history of treating his partners badly, and that didn't stop with Jennifer. They argued a lot and Richard could be hurtful. He later admitted that part of their relationship's problem was that Jennifer could keep up with him, meaning she didn't back down. They both had fiery personalities, which led to more fights.
As soon as he's off stage, he really didn't know how to operate in the world. Drugs allowed him to be something other than himself with a memory of that childhood.
Their marriage didn't last long, and they were divorced. Jennifer Lee Pryor was interviewed by People magazine after the first divorce about Pryor's semi-autobiographical film, JoJo Dancer, Your Life is Calling, describing the movie as a vacuous film and calling Pryor out as an abuser, saying that it didn't reflect how his life really was. You told me you watched your father and the pimps beat up the prostitutes as if they owned them and had the right to hit them. You told me it was that macho myth that made you think beating up women was the way to be a big, strong man. I know I have the bruises and the hospital records to prove it. Nothing funny about that.
I mean, Richie should have been in therapy, but he wasn't. He found drugs.
After that, Richard went through some big changes. He finally quit drinking and using drugs, and he stopped performing as much. Then in 1986, he married another woman, Flynn B. Lane, who was the mother of his son, Stephen. That marriage also didn't last, and they divorced 5 years later. Richard was diagnosed with a serious illness, multiple sclerosis, which affected his body over time. Needing help, he reached out to Jennifer again. Even though they'd had a rocky past, he asked her to come back into his life. He told her, "My life's a mess. Will you help me out?" Jennifer thought hard about it and decided to return. She knew that Richard sometimes played mind games with people, but she believed he was serious this time because he had hit rock bottom. When she got back, she found him living in a huge, expensive house he couldn't afford. She helped him move to a smaller place and took care of him as his illness got worse. They grew close again, and they remarried. Jennifer stayed by Richard's side, caring for him until he passed away in 2005.
He took me to the parties. He took me to the shit. So you seen the orgies. You seen the people that was the stars and the shit that they was doing.
Almost 9 years after Richard Pryor's death, a new biography called Becoming Richard Pryor by Scott Saul surprised fans by revealing that Pryor had acknowledged his bisexuality. Then a few years later, in 2018, music legend Quincy Jones and Pryor's widow, Jennifer Lee Pryor, shared even more surprising details. They claimed that Pryor had been open about his relationships with both men and women, including an affair with famous actor Marlon Brando. This revelation shook Hollywood and had people talking about Pryor's life in a new way. Jennifer Pryor didn't just confirm the story. She told TMZ that Pryor had always been honest with his close friends about his bisexuality. According to her, he never hid who he was. While Pryor was known as a funny man who made people laugh, it turns out he was also very open and true to himself. Jennifer says he didn't care who knew about his relationships, and he embraced his lifestyle, never shying away from his personal truth. But there's more. Jennifer shared that she has diaries written by Pryor that detail his personal thoughts, experiences, and romantic encounters. These diaries could give even more insight into his life. Jennifer hinted that she might publish these diaries, which could give fans a closer look into Pryor's private world. Hollywood insiders are eagerly waiting, as this could become one of the most talked about books in years, shedding light on his relationships, his struggles, and how he truly lived his life. When asked about the Pryor-Brando affair, Jennifer's response was bold and very 70s. She said, "It was the 70s. Drugs were still good, especially Quaaludes. If you did enough cocaine, you'd make love to a radiator and send it flowers in the morning." This paints a picture of a time when Hollywood stars partied hard and didn't hold back. In those days, people like Pryor were exploring their lives without worry about what others thought. Not everyone accepted these stories, though. Comedian Marlon Wayans shared his thoughts about Pryor's rumored relationships, saying Pryor was comfortable with himself and his sexuality. When TMZ mentioned that Jennifer confirmed Quincy's story about Pryor's time with Brando, Marlon suggested that Pryor had good taste and didn't have any reason to hide his relationships.
And I think what people don't know is he really was a dad. So he could be completely hands-on and completely hands-off at the same time. You didn't know which dad actually you might get.
But not everyone in Pryor's family agreed with what Jennifer and Quincy said. Pryor's daughter, Rain, was upset by the stories. Just days after the news broke, Rain posted on Facebook, calling Quincy and Jennifer bottom feeders for bringing up these old stories about her father. She claimed that the stories were false and defended her father's memory, saying he deserved more respect than this. "All you who touted faux news and preach about wanting blacks to be represented in a great light and then posted Q's interview are irrelevant and full of your own BS," Rain wrote. Q was once a brilliant music producer who was losing his mind and decided to garner publicity for himself with a sensationalized interview. And because y'all think and equate fame and money with decency, you ate it up like thirsty dogs as he spewed out a lie about my father, who's not here to defend himself. Then on top of it all, my dad's so-called widow validated it because she needs to keep legitimizing herself and tarnish our dad even after he's dead, she continued. Rain ended her note, letting her fans know that she wouldn't be putting up with hearing the news and would be, quote-unquote, getting my millions the correct way with integrity. Y'all so thirsty and love them, but ever know the real source or full story, and you're going to wonder how 45 became president. Wake up, she wrote. So read this. I don't need you as a fan or a friend. I don't need anyone in my life that thinks a sensationalized interview is relevant and incredibly well done, Rain added. People who lie or share information to raise themselves up are bottom feeders, no matter how much money or influence they have. Wrong is still wrong. Brando's son also disputed claims that his father had an intimate relationship with Pryor. Brando's son Miko told TMZ that his family is disappointed after hearing the rumors.
As soon as he's off stage, he really didn't know how to operate in the world. Drugs allowed him to be something other than himself with a memory of that childhood.
Richard Pryor's life was wild, troubled, and full of ups and downs. He dealt with drug and alcohol addiction and often got in trouble because of his own actions. These problems not only affected his career, but also hurt his relationships with others, including friends, family, and loved ones. Pryor's battles with addiction were intense. In the late 1960s, he was spending around $100 a day on cocaine, which is a powerful drug. He was arrested for assault and battery more than once and was even sued for hurting his wife. He was also accused of violent incidents, like stabbing a landlord with a fork and beating up a hotel clerk. Pryor's wasn't in a good way, especially after his grandmother Marie died in 1978. Scott Saul, author of Becoming Richard Pryor, wrote that this passing had shattered his sense of himself, and he fell into a profound depression. His world contracted into a black hole dominated by his freebase pipe, his paranoia, and his loneliness. Pryor suffered severe burns and nearly died after setting himself on fire. People wrote at the time, Los Angeles police say he was burned by an explosion while freebasing cocaine. The publication said Pryor's lawyer denies the report, claiming the injuries were caused by burning rum. The attorney was technically right in that burning rum caused Pryor's injuries. But as Pryor's biographer Saul notes, on June 9, 1980, Pryor doused himself with a bottle of 151 proof rum and set himself on fire. Not by accident, as he first claimed, but by choice. He had lost the will to live. Ironically, setting himself on fire revived it. That's how messed up Pryor's life was. The idea of him burning himself freebasing cocaine was more palatable than what really happened. According to Showtime special Richard Pryor, Omit the logic. Pryor had just been watching a scene on TV about the Buddhist monk who set himself on fire to protest the war in Vietnam. He ran out into the street to get help and ended up in the hospital. It didn't help that he was wearing a polyester shirt as it melted to his skin. His life was never the same again.
Performing in front of Whitey in that time, in that society, we want a clean black man. We want a black man to show everything's perfect. I have a family. I'm better than the rest of the black people.
Richard's longtime girlfriend, Patricia von Heitman, once explained his feelings during that time. She said, Richard felt he had to please the white audience, and he hated himself for it. According to Patricia, Pryor didn't like pretending to be someone he wasn't just to make people laugh. He wanted to talk about real things, even if they made some people uncomfortable. He didn't want to play it safe.
Do you know what it feels like for a black comic to walk out on the stage and not see his people in the audience? Check is good, but goddamn, that f***ing ride from that venue home is tough. You know, pretty sure that's how he felt.
In 1977, Pryor spoke at a big event at the Hollywood Bowl in Los Angeles. He was there to oppose Proposition 6, which was a California law that aimed to limit rights for gay people. Pryor's performance started off well. He got big laughs from the audience when he joked about personal experiences. But as the set went on, he started using offensive language, which turned the crowd against him. Pryor ended his performance by angrily telling the audience, "Kiss my happy rich black ass," and walked off stage. It was a shocking moment that showed how unpredictable he could be, even in public. This struggle pushed Richard to make a big change. Later on, he came out with his own comedy concert film called Livin' Smokin'. This film was different from anything he'd done before. On stage, he talked about his own life, his struggles, and his thoughts about America. He talked about growing up in tough neighborhoods, dealing with race issues, and his dreams for the future. This was not the kind of comedy people were used to, but it was what Richard wanted to do. Richard's widow, Jennifer Pryor, explained that performing this kind of comedy wasn't easy. She said, "Getting on stage is hard for anybody, but doing what Richard did was really hard." There was a lot of pressure on him at that time. People wanted Pryor to be a new voice for Black Americans. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, two major Black leaders, had both passed away. People looked to Richard to speak for them, but he didn't want to carry that heavy responsibility alone. He just wanted to tell his own story. As this pressure grew, Richard started to struggle with drug addiction. The weight of fame and the expectations placed on him were hard to handle. Drugs became a way for him to escape these pressures, even though they made his life harder in many ways, as earlier mentioned.
My wife says, express your feelings. Darling, don't lock it up, just speak your mind, try it. When I was just f***ing around, I didn't have to say shit, but can I f***? Goodbye, here's the money for cab.
Amidst all he went through, Pryor would always be seen as one of the greatest comedians ever. His style was so powerful that famous comedians like Jerry Seinfeld called him the Picasso of our profession. And Bob Newhart said Pryor was the best comedian of the last 50 years. Dave Chappelle admired him too, saying Pryor was like the most evolved form of comedy, bringing deep honesty and rawness to his jokes. Bill Cosby even said that Pryor made the line between comedy and tragedy almost disappear. In 2004, he was ranked #1 on Comedy Central's list of the 100 greatest stand-ups. Even after his death, Pryor's impact lives on. The animal rights group PETA named an award after him, and a statue was placed in his hometown of Peoria, Illinois, in 2015. In 2022, he was honored at the National Comedy Center, proving his legacy is as strong as ever.